Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the iOS Lead Essentials podcast. Here we discuss the strategies in your journey to become a complete senior iOS developer. My name is Bogdan, I'm a senior iOS developer and lead instructor in the iOS Lead Essentials program, the online training program for iOS developers who want to become complete senior developers. Today our special guest is Milan from Serbia, a senior iOS developer and student of the iOS Lead Essentials program. Hi Milan and welcome.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
Nice to have you. So Milan, can you tell us a bit about your achievements with the program that we'll be discussing here today?
Yeah, of course. So basically the biggest achievement is learning how to implement testing in real life scenarios. I was facing some very challenging situations for testing, like writer testing for communication with NFC, using NFC with smart devices, and where you need to basically test the reading and writing to the device and all the memory layouts. So that was kind of the biggest learning for me, and I was able to implement everything I learned in the program there. And as well, the latest achievement, if I can share, is basically landing a new job with increasing double increasing of my salary. So it's starting from September, and I can say that that's the latest achievement and maybe the greatest.
Awesome, that's really awesome. So you're getting a new job, a high pay increase, and of course a technical achievement of being able to write tests, automated tests, and be confident with that. Congrats on getting these. And for you watching, just stay until the end and learn how Milan did it, and you can achieve it too. Our goal is to find these replicable steps that others can follow to achieve the same. So, all right, Milan, let's start with your background. So, can you share how you started iOS development and when was that?
Yeah, for sure. So just for qualification, I'm not coming from strictly technical background, although I finished the mathematical course in the gymnasium. Then I went to the studies of journalism and communicology, but then I had always this inclination for IT, and I was building websites from hobby since 2010 and doing that as a freelancer, basically alongside my journalist job. But then in 2018, I really felt the need to move into a different direction, and I had luck to have my friend. My friend is still a senior iOS developer. His name is Boris, and I told him I want to move, to change my career, to move into the different direction, and he said, "Okay, the iOS is for you." So basically, didn't know nothing about iOS at that time. Had some background in the technology and websites, web development, but then, I bought my Mac and started learning, and pretty quickly I landed my first job, and then the real, game started. It was an outsourcing company with a lot of projects and, kind of a speed development process, very fast development process, no TDD. And yeah, but the really great learning, playground there, and that kind of pushed me totally into the direction. And then after a few years, yeah, I switched job, went to a really established and good company, and then I expanded, not just from iOS development. Yeah, it was iOS development, but it was more into mobile development as a kind of a software engineering, working with cross-platform frameworks like React Native, Flutter. Had to learn even Windows, how to put into the Flutter and all these things. So I expanded a lot, but at the end, I really had a big desire to go back to native, and then I got it with
Awesome.
this new job. Yeah.
So you have like a mixed background of both native development and Flutter. That's interesting because not a lot of developers have that. So it gives you this unique edge to see things from a higher level perspective. So now that you've been doing this for a few years, like, do you have any let's say bigger term goals for your improvement?
my, let's say, long lasting goal is like to stay in this game and to last in this game. And the way how I when I basically got that idea is there was a one project where I had to work with a German university, some German university, for building some very interesting application for learning, and I worked with their backend development guys. And there was a meeting room where I would jump in, from time to time, just to sync with them. And in that meeting room, there were like three, I can say, like Gandalfs. They were old, gray hair guys, sitting behind the laptop and just talking with them. It was like I was going to some kind of a wisdom sessions, and I was very impressed. And I was asking myself, how is possible that these guys can be my grandfathers? Are still in the game, still doing the development, still like having fun. I saw they are having fun. They were maintaining really big kind of server farms and all these things, traffic going on there. I was really impressed. And then I said, well, yeah, maybe that's the goal, because I saw other guys going into development, switching careers, lasting for like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years the most, and then just getting burned out and wanting to get out. So that's my, let's say, career goal, if I can summarize it.
Yeah, that's really really interesting and something I've never actually thought about for a long time now. But it's super valid. Like if you're doing the same thing for many years, like you said, at some point you have burnout, you have like maybe periods where your enthusiasm goes down, where you feel less motivated to work on the same stuff. And yeah, it's a super valid goal to just stay in the game, stay excited about what you're working on, stay focused. It definitely something that I try to do over the years. I'm also in the iOS development field for many years now, and yeah, that's the same thing I saw. Some of my colleagues just took sabbaticals, took like switched the technological stack or entirely to a different job, just because of the reasons you mentioned. So yeah, I think it's very important to have this, let's say, feedback loop where you get better, you learn, you work as a iOS developer in our case, but you still check from time to time and see, okay, is this going well? Is this going well? Can I do this for a long time? And if not, make the necessary adjustments. So yeah, awesome point here.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And how I see it is the most patient one, the most tenacious one win the game always. So no matter how you don't know anything, maybe you come as a really kind of a totally agnostic tech person. But if you are patient, and if you do learn every day and continue to develop, at some point you're gonna be better than the one who was very talented and knew a lot of things, but then quit after some
Yeah,
time. So
yeah, I agree. Okay, so getting to more specific topics, how'd you found out about us, about the iOS Lead Essentials program?
well, I must say that from the beginning, when I started learning, I learned from every resource I could get. I learned from Stanford courses, I learned from Udemy courses, I learned from blogs, etc. And of course, I found out essential developers. And I must admit, I really didn't understand Kai what was talking about. 80% he was talking about. Yeah, I could understand some things, but 80% I could not. These TDD concepts and all these architectural things were really new to me. I was following some things, but not everything. But it was bookmarked there, and I mentioned that I worked in this outsourcing company where the stress was high, and at some point, after maybe 2 years, I really went through a real burnout. I was pulling myself out for 6 months from that, and at that time, I went back to the Essential Developer, and there was this video, about the crash course. I think there was an announcement for some crash course, something like that. And there was this story about the guy I met in his company, where he was also going through the same thing. Yeah, like the stress and the messy code base, and then this senior guy came, saw, and just said, "Okay, goodbye." And I said, "Wow, that's the mentality I need. That's the knowledge I need." And that was the point. I made a decision basically to move away from that company to try something else. And really, I went through all of your Essential Developers free materials from the website, so no paid course. I went through all the free materials, and as I was a bit more experienced, like 2 years or something, I could understand more and more, and that helped me to land a new job in a much better company. So that's how I started with Essential Developers. And also interesting thing to mention, in the new company, the first thing I said is, please provide me with a full course, because it was kind of a 2000 US dollar, something like that. And my company really did that, the new company. And basically, then I went to the real essential iOS Lead Essentials program.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I understand what you meant. Of course, the content from the program can be daunting at first, especially if you haven't been exposed to a lot of concepts there. So I totally understand that. But yeah, that's what leveling up means, right? To go one level up in all the skills, you need friction, you need things that maybe seem very hard to understand at first. So yeah, the course has a ton for that. So you mentioned struggling with things like just architecture in general. What other things would you say were struggling with, or just looking for when you went to the iOS Lead Essentials program for knowledge?
What I noticed from all these experiences was this always daunting technical depth, always lurking behind some corner. And in the beginning of development of some new project, things goes fast, at some point, and then they start slowing down, and then you're forced to rethink or rearrange or restructure the code because of some new features or some new additions, etc. And that was really bothering me. And what I saw in the program and how the Essential Developers teach people is basically you start as a TDD, you start testing from the first minute. And it's slow in the beginning, it's very slow in the beginning, but then it picks up speed, and then you become more and more fast. On contrary, when you don't do that like that, you start fast, but then you get more and more slower and end up in a really nasty situation. So I said, well, that's a shift I need to make. And I'm still struggling, I can say, to really follow the true TDD from the beginning. Usually what I do is I start implementing, then I start testing. What I see Essential Developers do, they start testing, then they implement. But we are there, we are coming there. Anyway, it's those were my struggles, and those struggles also are related to architectural decisions, or how you are connecting your models, or navigation. Some simple things like a requirement from the business just comes and say, okay, we just want to come from this page to from this screen to some other screen, and you are in total mess because your code base is not allowing that. It's not flexible to change and add this requirement. Then you need to go through many layers and make these changes, and it just piles up during the time. So this flexibility, basically, to be open, for extension, open for changing the system without breaking other parts. That was something I was struggling, but I'm getting there. It's much better now.
I'm glad to hear that. And I think actually you don't know that your code is not flexible until you see flexible code, right?
Exactly.
at least in my case, where I didn't know how open close principle works and how to have code that allows changing, like you said, I would say, okay, it is what it is. Like changing the screen, the order of the screens in which we do navigation is something that's hard. Like you cannot do it very easily just because you haven't seen it done in a very composable way where you can just change the order with like two lines of code and stuff like that. So I fully agree. And of course, it gets better as you get exposed and implement some of these principles, and you start to see the benefits. And I really like I want to underline what you said earlier about the difference where you like between testing and regular non-testing approach, where you don't write tests, you start really fast in the beginning and then you slow down, which with each incrementation you make, you're just slower and slower. You can make less change until you get to the point where you say this needs to be rewritten, like refactored, something like that. Whereas with testing, of course, you pay some extra cost in the beginning, and as you get better, that cost is smaller and smaller. But then you can keep a steady line over the lifetime of the code base, because every new change is kind of similarly hard or similarly cost wise to make, whereas with non-testing it gets more and more heavier. So that's a really powerful idea, which is worth mentioning, because if you just have you're building an app for, let's say, a demo or something like that, then you probably don't need tests. There's a case to be made about that too, because usually the demo, if it goes well, then you need to put it in production and keep working on it. But definitely, when you want to have an app that's maintained over a longer period of time, I see a lot of benefit in just having the test approach. Ideally, even if it's the, let's say, cherry on top of the cake, test driving the implementation, right? Because it requires all the other skills to be able to properly test drive implementations using TDD. But it's also the most beneficial, I think, because it kind of drives the design, right? What I also noticed and shared with other developers is I noticed that when I'm test driving, I change my mind less often. So whereas with non-testing, I would just play around with some ideas and keep jumping forth and back between those ideas. When I test drive, it's kind of linear. Like the design uncovers itself. So if you try to quantify that with dev time, it definitely requires less time to do it, at least in my experience. So it's just going through the initial step where you don't know exactly what to do, right? Which test to write first, how to do that. It takes a while, but it's like any skill. You get used to it. So awesome points.
If I can add to that just shortly, this kind of approach where you need to test from the beginning basically force you to make some decisions much earlier than you would do, if you do it regularly. I still struggle to conceptually create the testing approach for something that I'm not clear yet, how to build. So that what I do now is an example. I build a class or some small, object that need to do something, and then I want to cover it with tests. And then when I start covering with tests, I often, change design, and rethink of everything. And then much earlier, I get proper, object to be used than if I just, put it there, to work along other code. And also one other thing to add is this, the speed of development is important from the perspective of companies. So not all companies want to support this. And I remember Kai's talk about that when he was basically struggling to convince, these business guys to allow him to do the TDD. And he wanted to prove them that it's going to be faster after some time. But in the beginning, it's not. And there are companies who are who are willing to do that, to allow this kind of concept, because they're probably working with much serious clients and are developing much serious applications. But there are other companies, like maybe smaller outsourcing companies, that don't care about that kind of quality or everything. They just want the production cycles to be fast and generate revenue, and probably you're going to have problems convincing them to do work like that. But yeah, that's my experience, at least.
I can relate to that. I also worked for outsourcing company for quite a few years in the beginning of my career, and I understand that point where, of course, an outsourcing company just wants to satisfy the client's requirements, and the client requirements are usually production requirements, right? I don't see that often clients that know exactly, no, we want to test drive, we want TDD applied, because they are not technical people usually, right? So they just know they need to build an iOS app for this use case, right? And then they hire a team, like outsource the project to another company and say, okay, build us the app. And of course, they have no idea what techniques we're going to use, but they don't tell us what Git branching model to use. They don't tell us which Xcode version to use. They don't tell us if we do CI or not.
But they tell you a very short deadline.
Of course. Deadlines are always short, and ideally fixed cost or something like that. I know how it works. It's just striking the balance, and I think testing is definitely has a place even in outsourcing teams. It's just that you have to see exactly what kind of company you're working with, and if that's possible. I mean, it's kind of like code reviews and I don't know, other forms of development work where you don't ask for permission. That's why I don't like this asking the boss for testing permissions narrative, because I think it's just off. Like, I don't ask my boss how many commits to make or if I should use Git or not. Like, I shouldn't be asking if I should be testing. It's my decision as a team group, as a team per se, because I mean, you can't do it on a developer basis. Everybody does what they want. That's not a good approach. But as a group, if you think, okay, testing is really important, then you do it, and that's it. Like, there's no discussion about it. So I know I left that company, but former colleagues of mine are really into testing now. So it's definitely possible and not always easy. Like you said, if somebody is micromanaging, then it's a lot harder to add that. But it depends on how you present it. Like, if it's an extra, like, do you also want testing? No. If you say, like, this is the way we do it, otherwise you're gonna have regressions and crashes, then they can't say anything, right? So, I mean, I've just simplified a very complex problem, so it's not like black and white, but nevertheless, the case can be made. So I'm not trying to, I don't know, say something really drastic, and people in that situation that are listening say, man, it's not like you present it, it's a lot harder. I tried it. Like, I understand, and I've been through the same discussions sometimes, and I am currently, and maybe in the future as well, where you need to convince certain people in the team about practices, about doing this versus that, and testing is one of them. So I totally get it. Like, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to deliver the best. Like, or like Kai and Mike said, to over deliver, right? To stand out in a team, you should be over delivering, not just complying with, okay, this is the standard. I meet the standard, so I'm good. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out as well. I think it's an excellent point. Okay, so to recap a bit, you found about the program at a time where you were struggling with architecture in general, with testing, with just making decisions. I guess maybe, I as well some more complicated decisions regarding your Flutter projects, because I guess those are a bit different than native ones. Like you maybe have to, I assume you have more constraints because of the extra framework that you have to work with. So you can't do exactly what you would do in a native app. But yeah, at that time you found about the program and you decided to join. Like, can you tell me how you decided and if you have any second thoughts or concerns?
Well, like I said, I demanded from my company to finance this course for me. I convinced them how important it is for our quality of the product, and they did it. Basically, well, at that time, I was working on the Flutter project, a very complex Flutter project, which was kind of a building a unified application used for iOS, Android, and Windows to communicate with smart devices used in smart buildings for controlling the airflow, the temperature, water, etc. It's a very kind of I can say low level programming where you really work with bits and bytes and shifting bits inside of bytes, and reading different chip types. Like we were using NXP chip types, IMS chip types, Panasonic chip types. All of them have different kind of behavior in memory, how you communicate with them, how they behave, how device behave, and we had to kind of write a software that will first unify all different devices and chip types, and then make it work on 3 different platforms, and kind of using the maybe similar interfaces and testing approaches, etc. I mean, you can imagine how complex was that. And my task, I was tasked I joined the team as a iOS expert. So my goal was to write the plugin for that iOS part, so the Flutter can communicate with the device through that NFC plugin for NFC communication, because Flutter does not have NFC communication out of box. You need to plug into the native layer, and then we come to these cross-platform specific things. So, an example, in Flutter, whatever feature more complex you want to add to the project, you need to add some third-party package. And like Flutter is kind of in my way, at some point I really call this Flutterstein, because it's kind of a Frankenstein. You added many packages, and you don't know who's writing them, and you need to do the analysis of them, and at the end, very often you need to write your own, if you want to have full control. That's what we ended up. And then I had to write the kind of a testing mechanism that all the code, like for, let's say, IMS chip reading and writing and all these things can be testable. So how to do that? I was kind of what to do with this. And then I went through the program, and I saw so many concepts. Like, okay, you start simple, and then you kind of refactor tests. Like, wow, refactoring tests. Grouping the common thing, like make SUT. Wow, SUT, what is SUT? And then how to track some things. And I was starting, doing this. And then I remember I wrote a test for I don't remember, I think it was kind of this connecting to tag and reading and writing some simple communication. And then I wrote down the make SUT. And I remember my colleagues asked me, what is make SUT? And I said, and then I was smart. I said, well, do you know about TDD? Well, they knew something. Well, I said, system under test. We are creating a system under test. Then I felt really kind of, I know something more, and then I got boost, in my confidence, and then I really started experimenting, and then went to this approach that, okay, well, I'm communicating with this device. That's kind of my system under test. The whole device is my system under test. My whole memory system. Give me the memory. I pulled out the memory of the whole position of data points and everything, and I put it there, and I basically pull it apart and all this. So I was testing, okay, so if I'm doing the reading of certain specific data points, I had a memory blueprint. I would put the command that would basically test it against that. And, I had kind of a very interesting approach for testing, and it was working. So really, and how I got these ideas really from the program, and it was for iOS development, and I was implementing it on a totally different platform. So that was amazing for me, really, and still is.
Nice. So you kind of immediately put the knowledge from the program into your into your project on testing
Yeah,
this low level communication with the device and testing the
yeah,
memory map. Yeah, that's really really cool, especially with things like a device where, I mean, you cannot do manual testing with the device, right? Because you always have to put the device in this weird mode
yeah,
or
yep,
simulate like a failure condition and then
yep,
test it. Like it takes so much time, and when you know how to do that with unit tests or
yep,
other kinds of automated tests, then it's so easier, and you can run the same tests 5 minutes from now and stuff like that. So yeah, that's really really awesome. Okay, and yeah, I mean, I understand how you decided to join. It's really cool again that you found support with your company, so they were able
yes.
to enroll and get your seat on the program from their side. Let's talk a bit about the process you took in the program. So how you went through the lectures, how, how do you find the time each day to study? How much time was that? Like,
So I joined the program in July last year. I still have few things to complete it to get my kind of a blue belt. So it's still under construction, let's say. Why? Because the project I was working on, and I'm kind of still finishing this up, wrapping up, is it was very complex. So I didn't have really time to work on that. So I was using all my spare time to then go to iOS. Then I was switching to Flutter, and it was kind of really difficult at some point because I was switching context a lot. I had to adapt to Flutter. But anyway, I was doing it in my spare time. That's why it took so long. And my approach was basically I would watch the video and I would code along. I would pause often, pause the video, and try to. I didn't want to go further if I don't understand what's going on, and that was taking me some time. Especially when Kai is
right.
playing with the closures and all these passings of the closures. So I had to understand who is calling who from where, etc. So I would pause it and go through the code, understand what's going on. Okay, let's do it. And it's great if you have if every day free and you can do it whole day. But if you have a full-time job and a very complex project, it can be very tiring. But still, I was able to complete it. Yeah, that was my approach. Also, I think it's also good to have a kind of a real life project where you can try to implement it, because it's not the same when you are creating some example app like for practice. And now, okay, you learn something, but then try to implement it in your surrounding, which may differ a lot from what you are doing there. And that was kind of giving me really, I think, a deeper understanding of what's going on. So, yeah, that was my approach.
Very nice. And just to double down on what you said, I think that's usually the problem with tutorials, with courses and stuff like that on the internet, is they have very simple examples, including Apple's samples, right? They have simple examples, everything is clear, it looks so nice, and then you start to think, okay, how can I translate this knowledge and put it into my own project? And that's where there's a big gap, and usually people say like, I just don't know how to apply it there. So with your case as well, so that's why, yeah, it's important to have that part where you try, even fail maybe, but really try to map, let's say, the new concepts you learn to an existing code base, and you see sometimes there are differences there are just maybe some approaches that don't work exactly as you learn them, and you have to adapt them. So yeah, it's part of the learning process, I guess.
Yeah, requires patience.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So now that you're 1 year and more into the program, and I would say you're almost done, right? Because you already passed the final challenge, and it's just
yes.
the
It's
remaining
just
bonus.
yeah.
So you took almost 1 year to complete it, which is fine if you don't have like space in your day-to-day agenda to like work on it consistently. Then yeah, it can take a while. But awesome that you got there. Awesome you could still apply on your day-to-day work as you learned, as you mentioned. Just being able to add testing to your project early on probably helped a lot.
Yes.
So now that let's circle back, like you mentioned before the program, you were struggling with architecture, with testing, with just making decisions. How do you feel about this now after you are, let's say, done with the program?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I learned some patterns which are very simple and can save your life, very easily. And I discovered the power of composition root, for. And I remember as well, as I was going through the program, and if you want the modular application, and proper dependency, management, you need this kind of model like composition root, or the main model where you compose other models, etc. And when we started this Flutter project, which was kind of a huge one, we had a really expert engineers who designed the architecture, and this design was very well thought of, but we didn't know what is going on, what will what we're going to face down there, what how it's going to be implemented. It's very a lot of platform specific things. And I remember we started doing things and building the application, following the architecture, but there was no composition root. They were using some other patterns, service locator pattern, etc., which I later learned kind of anti-pattern or whatever. But there was no composition root, And I was mentioning a few times, guys, we need a composition root. But I was not the one who was making architectural decisions. But I mentioned that several times, and then several months, went, and then they said we need a composition route. I said, yeah, I told you. So
Small
that was,
victory.
yeah, small victory. That was kind of a really small victory for me, that I was grasping the kind of overall architectural concept and where we want to go. And that gives you confidence, that really gives you confidence. And then also in the day-to-day situation, an example where you have a situation like you have a common interface, an example, which need to be used by mobile and also be used by Windows, an example. The Windows is using USB communication and mobile is using NFC and Bluetooth communication. That's a real life example. And we had a common interface for the device communication that's going to implement, kind of there is this part for that USB does not, that Windows does not need. We are making a dirty interface, and we need to make a decision to segregate, in order to have a clean thing. And we are allowing this to exist, and I'm kind of just kind of a guys, pay attention to this. We cannot allow this because it's gonna make us problem in certain behavior and in certain parts of the code. And still, yeah, we went to that place, and then we said, well, guys, we need to separate, and then it was more costly than if we did that before. So such things, and how to adapters, an example, very powerful things, when you need to kind of adapt all these things and kind of play this game with interfaces, and so such things I learned through the program, and I feel confident now when I need to kind of separate some communication or interface and make it clean and make it testable. I didn't know how to do that. Now I know. So yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, all the things you mentioned are just tools in the tool belt that you can use at any time. So,
Yeah.
And I'm surprised at how many developers actually never had access to this, because there isn't much content written out there about, let's say, composition root, about adapters. Like if you go through interviews, you see patterns discussed in interviews, maybe our delegate I don't know, target action, these kinds of patterns, but nobody talks about decorators, about adapters, about facade, stuff like that. And just knowing these gives you an edge already. And I guess the end goal is not the helpful pattern, is just being able to write small composable components that are easy to read, test, maintain, write, and just deal with over time. I guess that's kind of the bonus that you get in the end, is just tiny components that each one is super simple, and then you use composition to put everything together in an app, and that's it. Like there's no, I don't know, secret or very complex pattern to managing things. It's just simplifying, removing cross-cutting concerns like analytics, like threading, stuff like that, which makes components a lot simpler. If you remove these, it's just very basic code in there, right? Even if it's a communication with a device, it's still very simple. Just going back and forth, passing messages. Like it doesn't have to deal with threading. It doesn't have to deal with other, let's say, with analytics, because you also want probably some events tracked when you talk to that device to see where communication fails. But it doesn't have to be in the component that does the communication. So I think that's the game changer, in my opinion, right? Of course, having tests to back you up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and also what I learned there is the power of small decisions. Very often we make a decision without really thinking it through. How big impact it can have. And let me give you a concrete example in this project, which I'm talking about all the time. Basically, there was some time that you need to pass the localized message down there to the iOS pop-up, sheet when you're doing the NFC read and write, etc. So during the time, the application grew so large and so many layers were there that this simple decision, like passing the localized message to the that plugin layer, was a real kind of a big decision. Because in Flutter, the localization, you need to be on the UI level to get access to that app context, the app localization package, I think, something like that. And then you need to pass the localized message down there. And it need to go through all, these communication layers. And it was very kind of how you do that in a clean way. And it seems kind of small decision, you just need to show the localized message on the iOS pop-up sheet, but no, it was a very important decision how to do it and still keep the existing code base clean. I faced that, and I really, understood how important are these small decisions. I could do it very dirty and very fast, but no, I really tried to make it, clean and maintainable, and not to break the existing interfaces, etc.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's a great example where, it sounds like a simple decision, right? You just like pass a string down the line, but if that string is like belongs to a different level of abstraction, then you probably should find a clean way to do it, or to have some kind of another component deal with it, something like, I don't know exactly the specifics, but the example is very good, because over time all these tiny decisions add up, and they can drive you to a place where you have a project that has a lot of mixed concepts and mixed responsibilities in the same component, which makes everything harder. Or if you follow the small decisions approach that you mentioned, that every small decision can have a big impact, and you think about it, it can get to a code base where things are nicely separated and there's no violation of, let's say, law of Demeter, where you just use objects from other abstraction levels than your own, and it can be a totally different code base. Okay, so let me ask you a few questions about the most important achievement that you got this year, which I'm sure a lot of the viewers would like to know about, which is getting the new new offer, new role, and with a big increase in salary. So how can you achieve such a thing if you want?
To be honest, it was much easier than I thought. But basically, the need for that was that kind of my work in this project, in this Flutter project, I kind of, done my part there. Everything is working, everything is testable. What I was in charge for is, developed, etc. And then I felt the need to go back to native, really, because at this point I don't see myself as a kind of this cross-platform developer. I wanted to go to native, wanted to go to the clean ecosystem, without taking into consideration all these platform specifics and these decisions, which are sometimes nasty. And I just kind of put open for recruitment on LinkedIn, and pretty soon I got invitation for a company from France, and it was very interesting. It was pure native iOS development of the certain SDK. So it's not kind of developing the apps but also SDK. That's a product. It was very interesting for me. But to land the job there, I had to pass pretty interesting technical interviews, because I first had a technical interview with their data scientist, because this SDK gonna use kind of these new AI, magic. That's now the main thing. And they have this artificial intelligence and data scientist. So I had a use case, that they had to solve from that point of view. So they, kind of, it was a lot about improving the performance, the filtering, how to create the architecture for this certain use case. Very, very interesting. And I was so inspired. And I had I was following along the course also at that time. And I had kind of background inspiration, the approaches, and it went really well. And then my second technical interview was with the iOS lead, whom I'm going to work with. And it was he just said, we're gonna go very simple, but that's gonna show me everything. And it was just write a small networking layer just to ping the endpoint and get the data and parse the data. But he was able to see basically everything through that. How you gonna lay down and how you're gonna separate it. And it was an amazing opportunity, because we worked on a networking model. So I implemented a lot from the essential developer there, and he was very satisfied. And basically, pretty soon after that, I got offer, and I was really surprised, because it was, outmatching my current company really for a double, even more. I think 2.2 is increase. And I really felt surprised. I was very lucky, just because I wanted to get to native, and I got it. At the same time, I really felt kind of sad, because this company, I'm leaving, is amazing company, really provided me with this course, at the end, and gave me opportunity to grow in Flutter and learn all these, software engineering principles, which are agnostic to iOS. So I was a bit in mixed feelings, but then I talked to guys in my current company. I said them, and they said, man, just follow it, don't worry, and the doors are open to you. If something goes bad there, just come back here. We are welcoming you. And that was kind of really heart warming and melting for me. And kind of, I'm leaving my current company, in a very, very, good energy and emotions, and they're welcoming me back if I want to go back. And still, I have opportunity to pursue a new adventure. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's like the ideal situation, right? Where they understand the difference between the bigger offer and what they can offer you, and at the same time, I think it's good. I felt that in similar cases where they show you that you did did a very good job for them, right? They appreciate you. They say, okay, man, just let's keep in touch. If you want to come back, there's a seat open for you. So that kind of a, like you said, heartwarming feeling is incredible. And yeah, you just know that you've done your best for them while you were there, and also supporting your decision to change. So that's very nice. Very congrats. I think a lot of us would like to be in that situation, at least once or twice in our careers. So yeah, congrats, and good luck with the new role when you start it. Like it's not long till you will do the switch.
Yeah, it's in September. Actually, it's in a few weeks.
Traveling
to Paris, traveling to Paris for onboarding. So it's amazing.
Wow, nice. So let's take a few takeaways from the program. Like, what are the things that really stuck with you that you can say you always carry?
So first of all, TDD, right? It's a game changer in approach, in mentality. It makes you write a really nice code, make decisions early, have your back covered, during the time, and also that reduce stress. So it's very important to mention. It reduce stress. So TDD reduce stress. Just remember that. I went to burnout, and I know that TDD is reducing stress. It's a very, very important thing, very important takeaway for me. And flexibility. Writing the flexible code. It's kind of a holy grail for me. It's also reducing stress, because if when you implement the change quickly and without breaking everything and without thinking so hard about it, how you're going to do it, because you already put everything in place properly, then it makes your life easier, then it leaves you more time for something else. So I would say the ease with which you guys are doing this is kind of impress me. I'm really amazed at how you and Kai and Mike are writing that code, and how you do that, and the way you reason about it is mind-blowing. And that's kind of motivating me. That's like the inspiration I get from there is kind of also the key takeaway. I go back there just to see the inspiration in that code. Also, the complexity made simple. It's sometimes like there was this UI challenge, or the UI things you were tackling in the program, where I remember facing these struggles for, like the cell for all that, these things when you need to make a call and then render the image, and then some animations and all these things. How many problems in UIKit with that, how to do that, where to put it, how to cancel, then you use the package for that, etc., etc. Like I think it was Kingfisher used for many of these, and something like that. And then you see how he lands the very simple, nice solutions, even for testing such things. I was thinking, how is he gonna test, the UIKit kind of a table view and all these things? But no, everything, there is approach for everything. And that's something that's really kind of making complex things simple, and start in a small iteration, start simple, and refactor. The power of refactoring also, because numerous times I see they write the test, the class for testing, they write the class, and everything seems to be perfect, and then Mike says, I think we should refactor. And then Kai said, and I'm like, wow, I didn't see that. How is possible? Then we can do it even better. And no end for refactoring. And then I started loving refactoring, And so those are really, really things that I mean, if nothing, that's enough, just that is enough for everyone to join the program.
That's awesome. I would underline and maybe keep to mind this TDD reduces stress. I guess doctors should prescribe TDD for developers. That's a nice copy if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, totally, because of course, when you have testing to back you up, you no longer feel unsecure or worried about a change you're making in the code base. Like, is it gonna cause a crash in the evening, and I have to work like overtime and stuff like that, or I have the test to back me up, so I'm safe to. I think that's the most powerful thing to empower you to refactor. Like you said, refactoring is an ongoing process where you can always make the code a bit better, but it's very, like, I think the outcome comes from having tests, right? Unless you have the test, then refactoring is not real refactoring. And I mean, of course, the definition is that you keep the same behavior, just you change the structure of the code. So to be able to say, okay, this is the exact same behavior, you have to have some tests to guarantee that, and then you're much more powerful to just keep on improving. Like always, when you have a new idea to make a small improvement, you do it. Like you're no longer afraid to break something. So yeah, I think those are so powerful takeaways, which definitely help you in the long run, no matter if you do iOS development, Flutter, or something else. Okay. Any advice for people watching that want to also transform their careers? Like, what would you say is the most important thing you did to get there?
Yeah, so basically, as someone who is kind of a self-learning guy, I can say that basically everything boils down to the patience and going step by step, and being really intrigued how how something is working. Not getting satisfied if it's working. Just understand how it's working. Go deep, and that curiosity will basically brings you everything. Just go deeper. Always go deeper one level. Just don't take it for granted. This framework gives me something, and this behavior, and okay, that works this way. Why? What is this? What is this doing under the hood?
That's a very good point, which I also follow as well. So I think it's indeed, if you look at it like that, it's a differential between outstanding developers and just the regular ones, because the outstanding ones just want to find out why a certain thing is in a certain way, right? And it goes to tools, to, let's say, it applies to Git, to other source controls. Like whenever you're doing something, if you have that mindset, okay, why is this like this? Then you learn. That's when you learn. And I know countless examples where one would say, well, we need to call set needs layout on this view because it doesn't work otherwise. I'm like, why? Why does it require a set needs layout, or whatever, update constraints, explicit call, because otherwise you have a layout issue, right? Or dispatch asyncs, all the ugly pieces of code that presumably make it work, right? But over time, nobody will be able to explain this, and you just have some, I don't know, some real legacy lines of code that nobody knows why they're there. So I really like this point, just to try. Let's try to understand why does it happen, and sometimes you learn so much when you do that, because now you explore, let's say, a view's rendering cycle and some other things. So you have to read some documentation to try out some examples, and then a lot of knowledge is acquired through that process. So awesome advice.
The power of questioning. I remember one graffiti that really made a lasting impression on me. There was a saying written on the wall, says, "Question everything, Buddha."
Yeah.
And someone wrote down below that, why? Question
exactly.
everything. Why?
Right.
So question everything.
Right. It applies to even the
even
first
to
sentence. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So if anyone wants to reach out to you, a company or an individual, how can they find you?
Maybe the easiest way through LinkedIn. Milan Bojic, iOS developer, Serbia. I'll be there.
Cool. Awesome. So Milan, thanks a lot for sharing your story, for talking to me today. It was a pleasure. Keep in touch. I'm really gonna hold you accountable for your career goal to stay in the game for a long time. So I'll be checking in every few years just to see, are you still there? Are you still there?
Yes.
Just kidding, but it's a nice goal. So I'd like to just recap on that. It's important to be able to stay long in the game, in the marathon, like you said.
Yes.
So thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you for this very pleasant conversation. Very inspiring. Thank you.
Same here. And for you watching, if you want to learn more, just visit us at essentialdeveloper.com, and there you can find a bunch of free resources to improve your iOS dev skills. And we can also be reached on the social channels, YouTube, Twitter, and so on. Thank you, and see you.